I think it's great the way churches have become more inclusive and open-minded these days.
Yeah, I'm sure. I just don't think I'm really religious.
Oh, they're happy just to talk about stuff, and it's a great place to make friends.
Can I help you?
Hi, we're new to the area. We've just bought 3 of the old almshouses. We're having them knocked through, and we thought we'd just pop in and say hi.
Who the hell did you think you were going to say hi to? The Lord your God? Because I'm not sure you've lived lives worthy of his attention.
Yeah, we're not particularly religious, I suppose, but I think we'd both say we were spiritual people, wouldn't we, Tom?
Yeah.
And we're just interested to find out more.
Not particularly religious. Interested. Spiritual. Are you testing me, Satan?
What happened to the friendly lady vicar with the colourful jumper that I met last week?
She's gone, child. They've all gone. Banished by the bishop. I know where they're going eventually. In the meantime, Daventry. And we're back. The incredibly horrible and twisted people who are still unaccountably vicars.
Maybe we should...
I saw you in here last week. I saw you reading the notices and talking about your views and eating other people's biscuits. We were all watching you from the vestry, and we all thought you were a...
Steady on. Look, I mean, my wife's entitled to her views.
Oh, isn't she just? Aren't you all entitled to your half-assed musings on the divine? You've thought about eternity for 25 minutes and think you've come to some interesting conclusions. Well, let me tell you, I stand with 2,000 years of darkness and bafflement and hunger behind me. My kind have harvested the souls of 1 million peasants, and I couldn't give a halfpenny jizz for your internet-assembled philosophy.
Look, Sally...
Look, we have a right to be here. This is a place of peace.
Oh, please. That's a very recent idea, and not one that I think is going to catch on.
Well, I'm certainly not...
Begone! Begone to your satanic almshouse conversion! Leave here, damn sinning dog of a whore! Oh, at least leave a quid for the upkeep.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. My name is Chris. I'm one of the leaders here at Gateway Church, and I want to thank you all for coming along. So a couple of weeks ago, you might not be able to tell now, but a couple of weeks ago I was having my hair cut, and I was chatting to the hairdresser, and she said this line: "Well, those Christians, they're all a bunch of hypocrites anyway." And I said, "You're actually speaking to one." and I asked her to unpack that and explain why. And basically, she'd been going to a Catholic school since she was a young kid, and in that school she'd been hit repeatedly by the teachers there, and I guess that had left a lasting scar upon her outlook upon faith and religion, and it was interesting just dialoguing with her and hearing some of her pain and hurts. And I guess what really shocked me about this survey that we've done of the one objection is how big a response, how big an objection that Christians have put me off is. In fact, 26% of the responses we had were Christians have put me off. We had some quotes emailed and texted in like this. People use being a Christian as an excuse to be bigoted and prejudiced. Someone else said this: "I think the main thing that puts me off religion is religious people who are too pushy and force their religion or beliefs on you." Someone else said, "Why has the Pope got so much gold and cash for him alone?" And so tonight we're going to be tackling this objection, Christians have put me off, and then over the following 3 Sundays, the other subjects we're going to be looking at is suffering, there's not enough proof, and you can't trust the Bible. So let's crack on tonight with Christians have put me off. So I was meditating upon this, and I thought, what are the 3 main kind of crunch issues when it comes to Christians putting people off Jesus? And it boiled down to these 3 to me. The first is hypocrites. Hypocrites. Gandhi said this: when Gandhi looked at places like England and saw the materialism and read the Bible, how Jesus said, look, you can only follow God or money, there's a choice, he would say, hang on a sec, your Christians are nothing like your Christ. And maybe some of you have come across hypocrisy, maybe growing up in a church culture where you've seen people preach things but not practice them with their lives. The whole second area, I thought, is maybe that actually some people have been put off Christianity because they've met Christians who are, well, boring and dull. Maybe remember Ned Flanders, for those who like The Simpsons, and this is Homer Simpson's song about Ned Flanders. And maybe some of you are here tonight and think, man, I've experienced that. Christians who just seem so boring, so dull, so kind of heavy laden, so religious, so angry, and you're like, man, they have put me off. And then I thought about the third camp, and I suppose really it's just the evil that has been done in the name of Jesus. You can look at things like the Crusades, or even modern day, look at the kind of vicars who've been molesting children. We've been reading about that in the papers recently. Maybe you would agree with Dawkins, who said this. What he's saying there, that even books like the Bible, if you're not careful, can be used and twisted to promote horrible acts of violence. And if you look at church history, you can see that that's been done through things like the Crusades. And maybe for some of you, that's your objection, really. That's the crunch of the issue for you, while you maybe are here listening tonight. Because you've read history and you've realised the horrible things that people have done in the name of Christianity. Well, it's my heavy obligation tonight to try and give a Christian response to some of that question, that objection. And I guess my three responses all begin with S. They are sorry, they are signs, and they are see. Sorry, signs, and see. Let's start with sorry. This guy called Donald Miller wrote a book called Blue Like Jazz. And Donald, he was a Christian at university in Portland, Oregon, America. And he was chatting with his friend, how can they share the love of Jesus with people at their university? And what they decided to do was set up a confessional box in the middle of university during a week of what really is drunken debauchery. People run around naked, get completely high on drugs, and they set up a confessional box. But the twist with the confessional box was not that people would come in and confess their sins, but that Donald and his friends would sit in that box and confess to the people who did not have faith how bad Christians had been, how bad they had been in their own lives. He writes this in his book when he's having a conversation with someone who's come into the box. He says to him, "There's a lot. I will keep it short," I started. "Jesus said to feed the poor and to heal the sick. I've never done very much about that. Jesus said to love those who persecute me. I tend to lash out, especially if I feel threatened, if my ego gets threatened. Jesus did not mix his spirituality with politics. I grew up doing that. It got in the way of the central message of Christ. I know that was wrong, and I know that a lot of people will not listen to the words of Christ because people like me who know him carry our own agendas into the conversation rather than just relaying the message Christ wanted to get across. There's a lot more, In November 2009, a guy called Shane Claiborne wrote an open letter to Esquire magazine, the men's magazine. And the article started by saying this: "To all my non-believing, sort of believing, and used to be believing friends, I feel like I should begin with a confession. I am sorry that so often the biggest obstacle to God has been Christians. Christians who have had so much to say with our mouths and so little to show with our lives. I'm sorry that so often we have forgotten the Christ of our Christianity. Forgive us. Forgive us for the embarrassing things we have done in the name of God." And for what it's worth, I want to take a moment tonight and say sorry for where me, in my personal life, I've not represented God well. I've misrepresented him. And I want to say sorry to you if you're here tonight and you've been abused or hurt or mistreated or let down by Christians. I'm sorry. We're sorry. Because they haven't represented God well. You know, in the accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John in the Bible, we read several times of Jesus encountering people who have not represented God well. They're often referred to as the Pharisees or the teachers of the law in the New Testament. And in the book of Matthew chapter 23, Jesus has got his followers around him and he's telling them about these Pharisees who aren't representing the heart of God to the people. And he tells his followers this: they do not practice what they preach. We've heard of that phrase before, haven't we? You know, they do not practice what they preach. We use it. Oh, he doesn't practice what he preaches. Jesus came up with those words. Interesting, isn't it? They do not practice what they preach. Jesus was concerned to tell his close followers that there were people out there who were misrepresenting God. He then turns to these people who are misrepresenting the character of God, and he really unleashes some quite harsh words. This is the harshest words Jesus ever uses in the 4 accounts of his life. And he says things like this. He says to them, "You have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness." He goes on to say, "You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence." Verse 28, "On the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." How much does the church need to hear that message again? What's interesting, Jesus has 2 reactions to these people. Let's have a look at them. His first is in verse 33. He calls them snakes. He says, "You snakes, you brood of vipers." Why is Jesus using those words? Well, because he was angry. He was angry. And you know what? It makes me angry when I watch the TV or hear the radio and I hear people representing Christ but not representing him well. It makes me angry when I hear about clergy sexually abusing children. It makes me angry when the church shouts the things God whispers and whispers the things God shouts. It makes me angry when people misrepresent God. It makes me angry at myself when I don't represent him well. But the other emotion Jesus has to these people is compassion. He speaks to them. He says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem," speaking to the whole city, but still specifically to these religious people who aren't representing God. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." It's almost like he wants to be like a mother to these people. He wants to bring them close to him. And so as well as being angry at them, he wants to bring them close and reveal his true nature to them. And I guess it's an important message for us here tonight as well, that Jesus handled this well, didn't he? He got angry, yet he was still full of compassion. And I guess for me, it's important when we're thinking about how Christians may have put us off Christ, is that we have compassion for them. You see, Christianity is not about becoming a better person. It's about having a relationship with God, and out of that relationship, your life changes. You see, what you need to have in your heart to become a Christian is a sense that you are no good, that you can't do life on your own, that you need some help. And so, if you like, the church is more a hospital for sick people rather than a museum for saints. And so in some way, I suppose you could say, well, Christians really, in some way, should be putting you off God, because there are just a bunch of people who know they need help, and a lot of it. and we grow, don't we? I remember being at university and finding it hard when I was a new Christian, and I looked around and I saw people who didn't have faith were living better lives than me, and I thought, well, what is this about? How come they're better than me? Aren't I meant to be representing God? Actually, that's not the message. The message is that we can have a relationship with God. And yes, he'll change us, but that's a process. And it takes time. So the first S was sorry. Sorry if you've encountered people who don't know God, who think they do. And sorry if you've encountered people like me who are just trying to get along, just trying to enjoy God and do our best to represent him. The second S is signs. Signs. Milton Jones said this.
Is Christianity too weird? I think God's creation is like him, inexplicably clever, outrageously excessive, and a bit weird. But too many of us Christians just manage the a bit weird part. Often this isn't helped by the media, who try and find the oddest person with the most extreme views to represent Christianity. But sometimes we don't help ourselves. I mean, run it past me one more time. Jesus came to identify with the suffering of ordinary people, and now his chief representatives live in huge palaces and wear big pointy hats. And sometimes it's almost as if Christians can't cope with the fact that if you really do say sorry, God really does just let you off. So we have to make up other rules and special ways of talking to sort of help punish everyone. Often we're not very good at saying sorry ourselves. The Pope's first tweet was, "Praise the Lord." Perhaps it should have been, "OMG, Earth not centre of universe, soz Copernicus, lol." Yes, and to me one of the mysteries of Christianity is why so many Christians rarely admit that so much of it is a mystery. So you might think to yourself, it's all a bit too weird. I mean, apart from being involved at the beginning of science, systems of government, philosophy, art, schools, hospitals, the emancipation of women, the abolition of slavery, social welfare, helping form the basis of the moral code most people live by, and introducing popular notions of justice, mercy, decency and compassion, what has Christianity ever really done for the world?
You see, preparing this talk, it's been slightly depressing looking back on history and realising what Christians have done in the name of Christ and represented him badly, but it's also been encouraging because despite many misrepresenting God, many have represented him well. And that quote there goes on to prove it, just how much Christians have done for this world. Do you know right now the church globally is the biggest provider of AIDS care? Do you know right now UK churches do more youth work than the government? Did you know right now UK church volunteers over this year spend 98 million hours on local social action initiatives? Do you know in spite of the current economic problems, funds given by UK church members that were spent on social action initiatives have increased to £342 million last year? And the average number of social action initiatives undertaken by an individual church in the UK has risen from 5.7 to 8.2. Do you know that in Leeds alone, there are projects run by Christians that are helping asylum seekers, people in debt, the hungry, the homeless, international students, bored young people, the elderly, the vulnerable, the poor, those caught in prostitution, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, depression, pregnancy crisis, self-harm, and divorce. As a church, I'm proud to say that we run an initiative called Hope in Woodhouse, helping people in this local area. We run Cat Money courses. We work in partnership with people like the St George's Crypt, Christians Against Poverty, the Joanna Project, Kids Club, Youth Offending and Probation Services, Unity and Poverty Action Foundation, Compassion. We're a fair trade church, and through our groups throughout the city, we help and serve people in need. Sometimes there are signs that Christians represent Christ well. Sometimes the description Archbishop Temple gives of the church is true. The church is the only society that exists for the benefit of those who are not its members. There are signs. there are encouraging signs that sometimes we represent Jesus well. So I started off by saying sorry. I then drew us to that there are encouraging signs of Christians representing Christ. But thirdly, I want to end by saying see. See. Let's just start by looking at these three quick quotes. What he's saying there is, look, Karl Marx came up with this philosophy, Marxism, and many people did many evil things in the name of that philosophy. But you can't blame Karl Marx for that. He just came up with an idea. In the same way, you can't blame Jesus for what has been done in his name. Many people have done horrible things. It's not Jesus' fault. He didn't intend it to go that way. Secondly, if you just go that one. David Mitchell said this.
I'm not personally annoyed by atheists, but a lot of people assume I'm an atheist and sort of draw no distinction between being an atheist and an agnostic. And there's a sort of, particularly among, basically rational comedians like me, there's a lot of atheism going on. Yeah. And I don't accept the argument that atheism is the most rational response to the world as we see it. I think agnosticism is. And I also... I don't want there to be nothing. No. I'm not convinced there's something, but I do want there to be something. I want there to be an all-powerful, benevolent God. And I like that thought. And I was initially brought up with it, and now I'm not sure. Yeah. But I'm not ready to reject it. And I'm suspicious of the disdain for people who find that a comfort in their lives. And the sort of desperation among some atheists to tear that comfort away from them. Yeah. And the argument given for that is that religion has caused lots of killing and pain. And I dispute that, because so much killing and pain was done in the name of, communism or fascism. Humans have killed humans in the name of anything, and whether it's religious or political or whatever. Humans just like to kill each other. Yeah. And they'll use religion as an excuse, and they'll use politics as an excuse, and they'll use freedom as an excuse. But the idea that you take away one of the excuses that the killing will suddenly stop happening, I think is absurd. What you take away is the comfort that a lot of people have as they face the possibility of oblivion.
He's saying, look, he's really kind of giving an apologetic answer to these guys like Dawkins who say, get rid of all religion, and then there'll be peace. He's saying, no, the problem isn't religion. The problem is humans. Humans will use anything to kill. They just like to kill each other. Just by taking religion away, you're not going to solve the issue. The issue is the human heart. So therefore, can I encourage us not to chuck the baby out with the bathwater? Thirdly, let's have a look by this quote, Peter S. Williams. It's not a fair argument to say, I can't believe in Jesus because of what Christians have done. It's a bit like putting the cart before the horse. It's looking at the fruit rather than the root. Does that make sense? And so, I guess tonight I want to just conclude by saying, see Jesus. Yes, I want to apologise where you've interacted with people who have not represented the heart of God, the Jesus that we read about in the Bible. Yes, I want to point to some signs where there is actually encouraging fruit in Christians' lives. But ultimately, what I want to leave you with tonight is, don't let that put you off Jesus. Because he's good. He's really, really good. Jesus was murdered by religious people. They hated him that much. But you know what? On the cross, he said, Father, forgive them. And maybe for some of you, you're really just bitter and angry at what Christians have done to you. And my encouragement for you tonight would be to see what Jesus did. And he said, Father, forgive them. And how could he do that? Because of our own strength, it's pretty impossible. He could do it because he had a relationship with his Father in heaven. Because he knew the goodness of God in him as well as being God himself. He knew what it was to have a father that loved him, that cared for him, that always looked out for him, that would never leave him or forsake him, that he could trust him. And that same Father tonight wants to meet with you. He wants to have a relationship with you. And he would feel anger where you've come across Christians who put you off, and he'd feel compassion for them and for you too, because he would want you to know him. And he gives you that opportunity tonight.